Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to our National Consumer Protection Week webinar. I am Kayla Hernandez Ulloa, Acting Chief of the Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division, also known as CAOD. CAOD is the division that engages the public through outreach and education initiatives to inform consumers about regulatory programs, telecommunication issues, and other issues that impact their day-to-day lives. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to go over some housekeeping rules. Please keep your cameras shut off and your microphones muted. If you need to change the view on your screens to look at the webinar as we are going through differently, please do so using the view function within the webinar. Also, for those of you that are interested in looking at particular speakers, please use the option to pin. You can look down at the speakers. There are 3 dots closer to the right side of the screen where you can pick the pin option. Today, next slide, please. Today, we have a very great packed agenda. We will have information about robocall scams that happen in 2025. We'll talk about emerging scams. There will be a short presentation about abbreviated dialing codes and a presentation on the FCC's covered list. All questions will be asked after the speakers have presented, and we will have the opportunity for Q&A. For submitting questions, please use either the Q&A feature, and we will be monitoring the chat in case some of you have questions that you would like to ask us. Next slide, please. Our first speaker today will be Ed Bartholome, who is the Chief for the Consumer Affairs and, the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. All bios are available at the end of the presentation for the full bio. I will just quickly read through a little bit of Ed's bio. He is the Bureau Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau here at the Federal Communications Commission. In this role, he leads CGB's efforts to ensure that the Commission meaningfully engages with external stakeholders, including state, local, and tribal governments, and the general public, and oversees the Bureau's work to implement consumer policies, including those related to disability access. And with that, I leave you with Ed.
Thanks, Kayla. And thanks to everybody who's taking time to be here with us today during National Consumer Protection Week. Protecting consumers is central to the FCC's Build America agenda, and stopping illegal robocalls and scam text messages is the FCC's top consumer protection priority. Next slide. Oh, sorry, we're on the right slide. Fraudsters have long preferred phone calls and texts as a tool for initiating scams. Robocalls allow them to target large and geographically diverse groups from a single location, and typically that distance and the ability to be anonymous has provided them with an opportunity to get away with their scams. Scammers are also really good at adjusting their cons as well as their technical approaches in order to avoid detection. This has made past enforcement efforts feel like a game of whack-a-mole with results that only seem to make a temporary dent in the problem. In an effort to make more meaningful progress and return trust to calls, the FCC has adjusted our strategy. We're now focusing on attacking this issue at every stage of a call's life cycle, or all along the call's path from its origin to call completion. We think this comprehensive approach is our best shot at solving this problem for good. The Commission has initiated proceedings that would provide consumers with more accurate information about who is calling them, so they won't have to guess if the call is one they want to answer. And to combat scams that originate in foreign countries, we're exploring ways to better disclose for consumers when a call is coming from outside the United States. To stop illegal calls before they start, we are exploring ways to restrict access to phone numbers. We've also empowered providers to block bad traffic as it moves across their network and taken steps to remove providers that pass bad traffic from accessing the network entirely. When we do identify illegal campaigns, our Enforcement Bureau continues to take strong action against the callers involved. Over the past year, we're starting to see results, at least according to UMail's data. The last 4 months have all seen a steady decline in robocall totals. Unwanted calls are down around 20% during that period. And when you compare the January 2026 numbers to more recent numbers, it's about a 14% drop in overall robocalls. I encourage you, after today's webinar, to visit our Consumer Help Center at fcc.gov/consumers, where you can find posts that outline some of the scams we're talking about today, as well as many others. You can learn about a range of telecommunications service topics. You can file consumer complaints with the FCC and download tip cards and other resources that you can share with your community. And on that last note and opportunity, sharing is important. Informing your friends and family, as well as your broader community, about how scams like government imposter scams work can be an important tool in preventing someone from falling victim. Before I hand things over to our first presenter, I'd like to thank my colleagues that are presenting today, as well as the FCC's Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division for their work to organize today's webinar. With that, I'll introduce Christy Thornton, an Associate Bureau Chief in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, to cover our first topic, FCC unwanted call complaint trends. Christy?
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you so much for joining us during National Consumer Protection Week. As we think about that week, one of the things, as Ed mentioned, the Commission thinks about is robocalls. And so in my work with the Consumer Inquiries and Complaints Division, which handles the Commission's Consumer Complaints Center, we see trends in robocall complaints from consumers like you. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you about the top 5 consumer reported complaint categories of 2025. Next slide, please. I hope this pie chart helps give you a visual for what I'm going to be talking about for the next few minutes. This shows you the top 5 complaint categories reported by consumers in 2025. For each of these on the next few slides, I will give you an overview of what that scam may look like. I'll give you examples of those scams. I'll give you signs to watch for to help identify a scam, and then what you can do. But let's look just really closely at this graphic. We're talking about debt relief and loan assistance scams. 27% of the complaints from consumers that the Commission received were about that last year, followed closely by insurance and other healthcare scams, government imposter scams, which I'll explain a little bit more, credit and credit card scams, and then finally, unique to businesses, is Google listing scams. Let's dive into those. Next slide, please. So let's start with debt relief and loan assistance. And while I just said that I would be giving you an overview, for this particular category, it's easier and probably more helpful to just give you samples of those complaints. We have 3 subcategories in this main category, and the first is mortgages. So an example of a mortgage scam complaint says things like, I'm getting calls from different numbers, and each promises mortgage loans or debt assistance. Probably something you can identify with, and you may have heard about that over the last year. Importantly to note, this consumer says that they haven't consented to those, they haven't requested them or permitted them to call them. Mortgages are followed by payday loans. This one looks like the complaint says scam robocalls supposed for debt on a payday loan, but the consumer says they haven't taken out a payday loan. The calls, of course, are relentless. And I like the last phrase in this scam, or in this consumer complaint. It says, the person tries to verify my personal information, including date of birth and social security number. Next slide, please. The third subcategory under this first main category is student loans. You may have gotten these at some point in the past, particularly if you've ever been a student with a student loan. The interesting thing about this is they aren't looking just for people with student loans to try and scam. They're looking for anyone that answers a phone. So this consumer says, I asked for help with student loans, or I'm sorry, a robocaller named Julie calls saying that based on her file, this consumer asked for help with student loans being cleared because of a class action on their school. But none of this is true. So what can we do about these, and how do we identify them? Next slide, please. So signs of this scam: a demand for immediate payment. The caller may say, your loan is overdue and you have to pay us now. They can also, as you saw from one of those complaints, fish for personal or financial information. They want your date of birth, they want your social security number, anything that can help them build a profile on you. So what can you do about these? Well, first, do not give payment or information over the phone. And then if you do have student loans that you are concerned about, contact your financial institution using a number from a printed statement or from the bank's website. Don't rely on the phone number that the caller gives you as a callback number or that may be in a text message. Verify that phone number independently. Next slide, please. Our second most prevalent consumer complaint category is insurance and healthcare. So for an overview, the insurance scammers may spoof their phone number, that would be the number displayed on your dial on your screen, to appear to be from a government entity or an insurance provider. They may offer healthcare screenings or gifts, but the point of what they're trying to do is to get your personal information and then scam you. Here's an example of what that looks like. This consumer says they receive 25 to 40 calls a day from different groups trying to give them information about Medicare or different insurance plans. But this consumer has never asked for those. And when they call the number shown, it goes nowhere. No one's answering that call. If she waits for a person to come on and tell them to stop calling, I like this one. They said, I didn't call you, you called me. So how do you identify these? Next slide, please. So a first sign of a scam here is that they're going to request information from you to prove your identity. Not always, but sometimes. In other words, they're going to say, yes, can you verify your account with us? Can you confirm the information I already have by providing your account number, your social security number, your date of birth? They're also possibly going to request payment or personal health information. Anything like that someone asks for over the phone, you should just do the following things. First of all, hang up. And then second, don't press 1 to unsubscribe or to speak with an operator. You may have noticed in the complaint previously, the consumer said, I pressed 1, but nothing happened. Better just to hang up. So next slide, please. Third category, government impersonation. Particularly with tax season approaching, you may be receiving calls that pretend to be from the IRS or from another government agency regarding your tax refund or tax debt. You may also get a call from someone purporting to be from the FBI or even from the FCC, saying that there is a legal problem they need to handle with you, and they may or may not be requesting personal information. So what does this look like? I receive multiple calls a day from a company pretending to represent the IRS and offering a debt solution. Or the second one, I've started getting a significant number of spam calls claiming they are coming from the IRS. I block them, but they still find me, and I'm getting spam texts as well. So next slide, please. What are some keys for spotting these? Well, first of all, keep in mind that government agencies do not call or text people in this way. Chances are you're going to get a letter first, and it's going to be a pretty official looking letter. Second, pay now or else threats or big payout offers are a sure sign that you're being scammed. The government doesn't take credit cards over the phone generally. We don't ask for cryptocurrency or payments by gift cards. Third, instructions to pay with gift cards or cryptocurrency. As I just said, that's not going to be your government calling. So what can you do? Hang up. You may be hearing me say that a lot. Good tool is to just hang up. And then report that scam call with the federal agency who pretended to call you. So go to the government agency's website that ends with .gov, find contact information, and report that scam to them directly. Next slide. Our fourth category is credit card offers. These have been around for a long time. They're not going anywhere unless we can do some real work on it. So calls or voicemails can claim to be from a credit card company or your bank, alleging to inform you about unauthorized activity on your account or to lower your interest rate. They're looking for your debit and credit card numbers. So here's what one looks like. I received a call supposedly alerting me to changes that were made on my bank card. I don't remember all the details, but one charge was for $4,000. And then basically they're saying they asked me to press 1 to say if I didn't make that call or if I didn't make that charge. They're wanting you to press 1 so they can interact with you. Next slide, please. So how do you spot these? Well, you're going to get possibly a request to verify your account information or specific charges. If someone asks for your credit card number, the last 4 of your social security number, did you shop at this date and make this purchase, they're fishing for information. They may also want you to answer questions by pushing numbers or entering 1 or 2 for yes or no. What should you do? You can probably say it with me now. Hang up. Don't answer yes or no questions or push numbers to respond. Don't provide your account information. And again, just as I said for contacting federal government agencies, find a contact number for your bank or on the bank website or your bank statement and call back using that number. If there really is a problem with your account, that number can help you get to the right person. Next slide, please. And number 5 is a Google listing fraud. This is calls to businesses. Businesses are receiving these, asking them to verify their business for a Google listing. And scammers want to sell businesses unnecessary services, charge for free verification, or steal their login and payment details. Here's an example of one. I've been receiving phone calls from multiple different numbers telling me my business is not on Google. They say things like Google business account, our system shows a new search for your business. Press 0 to speak with an agent immediately. They indicate that people are having trouble finding them, which is a real fear for businesses. They want customers. So they're asking for contact, press 9, press 0 to help solve that problem. Next slide, please. So what are signs of this scam? Pressure to act quickly to make payments. Threats to remove a business from a listing. So what can these businesses do? Hang up. Don't push numbers in response. Don't provide account info. And if you really think there may be a problem, contact Google directly. That's my information on the top 5 scams of this last year. I hope it's really helpful for you in keeping yourself safe and protecting your phone and your identity. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my next speaker, David.
Thank you, Christy. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for National Consumer Protection Week. My name is Dave Savalane, and I'm with the Consumer Education and Outreach. Sorry, I'm with the Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division. Next slide, please. I'm going to be discussing some of the trends and scams that people are experiencing across the country, and some of the warning signs that can help you not be their next victim. Next slide, please. So, as I'm sure all of us are aware, con artists and scammers have been around for a very, very long time, and they adapt to new technologies very quickly, from the telephone to email to text message. But the scams that we experience today come from very old scam formulas. And if you experience any of these, the following, consider it a red flag that a scam is in process and that you should not continue to cooperate. For example, a scammer will prey on a target's fear by threatening something dangerous unless the target pays right away. It could be a fine, it could be criminal charges. A fake prize or award or product may be offered that the target must claim, but to claim it, there will be a process where you send them money. Posing as a trusted person or entity, such as a bank that you do business with, a business that you do business with, a member of your family, etc. And also false opportunities for business investments or for romantic relationships. And these scams have not been without cost, as just in 2024, according to the FBI, online and internet scams cost Americans more than $16.6 billion. So this is not a victimless crime, to be sure. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be discussing long cons versus short cons. And while you may already be aware of the different types of scams that are out there, for the purposes of this presentation, I wanted to just explain what it is we're talking about. While the kind of scams and cons of the short variety have been all too common over your emails and texts and phone calls, long cons have been increasing in occurrence in recent years, and it's important to know what dangers may be involved with that. Many of these long con scams just start out looking like an innocent or accidental text message or email or phone call. It may want to just start a conversation like, can we talk? Or seem like an innocent request. I lost my contact list. Who is this? I personally have received the last one that's an example there, want to have steak tonight. And while steak did sound pretty good, I did not respond because I knew it was a scam. A conversation will start, that is the scammer's goal, in order to make a personal connection with the target. And eventually it ends with the target losing a lot of money and personal data that can be used to steal their identity. Next slide, please. So just a quick breakdown. The short con is quicker, it involves less money, and it relies on deception. It isn't nearly as well thought out or planned. Examples of this, phishing, where they try to trick you into clicking on a link. If someone picked your pocket, if someone tries to steal your data, that is quickly done, and then they try to steal your identity. Quishing is the same thing as phishing, only it's with QR codes. They try to trick you into scanning a QR code, which will then download malicious software onto your smart device, and they will be able to steal your data. A long con can be carried out over weeks, months, years, and it relies on gaining the trust of the target with the intention of having a much larger theft of their assets and information. It often involves significant planning and research, sometimes involves more than one person running the con. And examples include attempts to get the target to invest in scam investments or to establish a romantic relationship with the target, which will then eventually result in financial loss. Next slide, please. So a financial long con can look like this. A scammer will attempt to establish a friendship or relationship in an innocent-looking manner, seeking to gain your trust over a period of time. But eventually, they will contact you about a can't-miss financial opportunity with guaranteed high profits and no risk. However, the target has to act quickly, not giving them enough time to think about it or research it, and they often will use non-conventional currency transfers like cryptocurrency or wire transfers to make the investment. Signs that it's a scam: if someone is engaging in this with you, they will refuse to produce any paperwork supporting their investments, or if they do, it looks piecemeal and haphazard. They will avoid meeting their target in person or teleconferencing so that you don't know what they look like. They will come up with excuses every time. They will be the ones to initiate contact with you, which is, I'm sorry to say, cynically, that's more often than not how this all begins. They are seeking their targets out. And they will claim to have insider information, which is why they know that this is a great investment, even if no one else does. And they will also push a false sense of urgency that you have to send the money now, or the opportunity will be lost. Next slide, please. Now, on a romantic long con, you may have seen plenty of stories about scam artists creating fake profiles on dating apps and social media, and they will make themselves findable by those who are seeking romantic relationships. The scammer will attempt to establish a bond with the target, and after that bond is established, they will start making requests for money due to a false emergency or hardship, travel expenses, medical problem, what have you. The target will end up feeling compelled to send money to the scam artist in order to help them when the entire thing was a scam. Signs that it is a scam include any requests for money, refusing to meet in person, again, coming up with every excuse for not teleconferencing or having lunch, anything like that. Requests for information about you that could be used for identity theft. It can be as simple as your address and your name. If you have children, which can be cross-referenced to other information on less reputable parts of the internet to steal your identity. They can attempt to isolate you from your friends or family so that you will be less likely to receive the guidance that will help you escape the scam. They will speed up the relationship too quickly, or at least it will appear to the target that things are going too fast. And also their online profiles may show few or no other online friends, a sign that it was just slapped together and put on the dating app without any elaboration or any way to check on this person. Next slide, please. I'm going to cover just a couple short cons that are very, very common these days. First one being the package delivery scam. You probably receive these as many times as I do. That's a scammer will inform a target about an alleged package waiting to be delivered to them. It might require you to click on a suspicious link or make a delivery fee payment. And recently, some of these scams have mentioned a missing tariff payment that the target has to pay in order to get the package. And the message may also suggest the package will be destroyed unless the target complies with the instructions. Signs to look out for: if they provide a web link and you're able to hover over it, if you're on a laptop, you're able to see what the web link actually goes to. And if it goes to a URL that is not to an established package delivery service like the U.S. Postal Service, FedEx, or UPS, it should be a red flag that this is not a legitimate communication. Also, the urgency of action required is usually played on, that you have to respond to a certain amount of time. And so that should be a warning sign. What to do if you get one of these scams? First off, don't click the link. That's phishing. Don't scan the QR code. That's quishing. Don't call the callback number. That just proves to the scam artist that it's a live number, and you will receive a lot more attempts to scam you, a lot more of the same kind of scam messages if they know it's a live number. And lastly, if you think that there may actually be a package because you ordered something recently, you can independently verify that with the company that you purchased it from and from whom and who the shipping company would be that's shipping it to you. You don't need to respond to anything that is in their text message or email. You can verify it independently. Next slide, please. And the last scam I'm going to cover today is the ISP imposter scam. If you've ever gotten a unsolicited call or text or email offering to lower your internet or cable bill, and all you have to do is prepay part of the bill, that is a scam, and it hits thousands of Americans every year. Signs that this is one of those ISP scams. As I just mentioned, they ask you to prepay part of your next bill to qualify. They could be promising you any sorts of discounts on your internet or cable bill, but the key element is asking you to pay ahead of time for part of the bill. And they will ask you to pay in a non-conventional manner, such as gift cards or cryptocurrency. So what to do if you get one of these scam emails or texts? First off, do not provide any personal account or payment information, any of which could be used to steal money from you later. And do not call back any number that they provide especially if you are being contacted by a recorded message informing you about this amazing opportunity to lower your internet or cable bills. And you can always verify independently with your provider as to whether this offer is legitimate, and your internet and cable provider may be grateful that you're letting them know that their name is being used in a scam. Okay, and I am now going to pass the mic to my colleague, Alma Hughes.
Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon. I'm going to briefly talk to you about what is an N11 number. Next slide, please. N11 numbers are abbreviated telephone calls that provide direct access to specific services like emergency services 911 or community information 211. These 3-digit codes bypass the need to dial a full 7 or 10-digit number and connect callers to the designated service. In the United States, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, manage these codes, with some being nationally assigned and others potentially assigned locally. N11 codes are widely available in most areas of the country, but may not be available in smaller or unincorporated areas. Next slide, please. 211, Essential Community Services. Types of referrals offered by 211. I'm just going to go over a couple of them. Work support, including financial assistance, job training, transportation assistance, and educating programs. Another support for older Americans and persons with disability, including adult daycare, community meals, respite care, home health care, transportation, and homemaker service. There are quite a few community service that you can reach by dialing 211 in your area. Next slide, please. 311, non-emergency local government. The FCC approved the national 3-digit number 311 for use in 1997. It is used for quickly accessing non-emergency police and other government agencies. The objective of this number is to divert less urgent calls from 911 operators. Next slide, please. 411, Information Directory. 411 is a telephone service in the U.S. and Canada used for local directory assistance to find residential or business phone numbers, addresses, and sometimes to connect calls directly. It operates 24/7 as a paid service. The FCC has not assigned this number for nationwide use. Ask your provider if 411 is available to dial in your community. If your provider still offers 411 and you call the number, you'll likely reach a directory assistant where an operator or automated system finds phone numbers and addresses for a fee. Today, 411 is used as slang to address the latest news, gospel, or the scoop on a specific topic or person. Next slide, please. 511, National Travel Information. The FCC designated 511 as the National Travel Information Number in 2000. The 511 system provides real-time information about traffic, road conditions, and other travel conditions to drivers and shippers. Dedicated state and local agencies are responsible for implementing and funding the system. According to the Federal Highway Administration, 40 states have some form of an operating 511 system. Next slide, please. 611, General Telephone Repair. In the context of the FCC, 611 is a North American Numbering Plan NANP code, not formally assigned but commonly used by telecommunications providers for general customer service or repair service. Currently, wireless customers may dial 611 or star 611 for repair, while wireline users may dial 611 for customer service. Next slide, please. 711, TTY-based telecommunication relay service. TTY-based telecommunication relay services permit persons with a hearing or speech disability to use the telephone system via a telephone TTY or other device to call persons with or without such disabilities. To make using TRS as simple as possible, you can dial 711 to be automatically connected to a TRS communications assistant. It's fast, functional, and free. Dialing 711, both voice and TTY-based TRS users can initiate a call from any telephone anywhere in the United States without having to remember and dial a 10-digit SS number. Next slide, please. 811, this is my favorite. Call before you dig. The FCC designates 811 as the nationwide number for contractors and others to call before conducting investigation activities in March of 2005. The nationwide abbreviated dialing code provides an effective replacement for an array of numbers used across the nation to connect to communication systems operated by underground utility operators and state and local governments. One call notification system enables contractors to give advance notice of their plans to excavate so that utility companies can mark underground facilities prior to excavation to prevent damage to these facilities. Every dig requires a call. Call before you dig. Next slide, please. 911, the nation's 911 system. 911 service is a vital part of our nation's emergency response and disaster preparedness system. Consumers use 911 used to request immediate assistance from police, fire, or emergency medical services, EMS. The Wildland Communication and Public Safety Act of 1999, the 911 Act, took effect on October 26, 1999, with the purpose of improving public safety by encouraging and facilitating the prompt deployment of a nationwide seamless communication infrastructure for emergency services. One provision of the 911 Act directs the FCC to make 911 the universal emergency number for all telephone services. Next slide, please. And lastly, 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. 988 is the 3-digit nationwide phone number to connect directly to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. By calling or texting 988, available 24 hours, 7 days a week, you'll connect with mental health professionals who provide confidential support during a suicidal crisis or mental health related distress. This service is formerly known as the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And thank you for your time. Next slide, please. And now I'll turn this over to Chris Meek.
Great, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Smink. I'm an attorney in the Operations and Emergency Management Division in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Next slide, please. So I'm here today for a few minutes to talk about the FCC's covered list. I'm going to give a brief overview of what the covered list is, some of the impacts and the implications, and then I'm going to talk about some of the recent additions that the Commission has made to the covered list. So what is the covered list? Broadly speaking, it's a list of equipment and services that executive branch agencies have determined pose an unacceptable risk to the national security of the United States or the security and safety of United States persons. The Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau maintains the list, and we make periodic updates as necessary when we receive determinations from those other agencies. The covered list was initially established by Congress in 2019 through the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act, also sometimes known by its short title as the Secure Networks Act. Like I said, specific determinations about the security risks are made by executive branch agencies, including the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and a few others that are specifically listed in the statute. If you want to find the covered list, it's available on our website at fcc.gov/supply chain/covered list. Next slide, please. So just to give a brief overview, there are currently 12 different entities or entries listed on the covered list. Some of them you're probably familiar with. You've probably heard in the news. Back in 2021, for example, we added telecommunications equipment that was produced by Huawei Technology Company and ZTE Corporation. And then the following year, in 2022, we added telecommunications services that are provided by China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom. So those are just a few of the entities that are listed on the covered list. As you can tell, a lot of them have connections with foreign adversarial governments. A lot of the entities are closely associated with the Chinese Communist Party in China. And the executive branch agencies determined that because of the control and the ownership and the influence by those foreign adversarial governments, there were security risks that necessitated those entities being added to the covered list. So the way that it works is once a piece of equipment is added to the covered list, it's prohibited from receiving FCC equipment authorization. As you may be aware, the Office of Engineering and Technology reviews and analyzes and performs some testing on electronic devices before they're able to be sold or imported or marketed in the United States, and that's known as the equipment authorization process. Once a piece of equipment is added to the covered list, it is no longer eligible to receive a new equipment authorization. One important thing to note is that prohibition begins on the date that the equipment is added to the covered list. So that means that older models that were produced or sold or purchased by consumers before the equipment was added to the covered list can still be used legally in the United States. Next slide, please. So the covered list prohibits the use of universal service funds, which are federal grant funds, to support the purchase, leasing, maintaining, upgrading, or otherwise acquiring covered equipment or services. That mostly applies to service providers. That funding is not given to individuals, but that's more just so you're aware of one of the prohibitions of the covered list. Like I said a minute ago, the presence of the equipment on the covered list does not prohibit its use or operation in the United States. It simply means that it cannot receive an equipment authorization, which means that it can no longer be marketed or sold or imported. But an older piece of equipment, an older cell phone, an older piece of telecom equipment that was purchased before being added to the cover list can still legally be used in the United States. And that's probably the number one question that we receive. Beyond the specific restrictions, the covered list also provides just a general sense of some of the security risks of the equipment, both to our federal, state, and local partners, but also to consumers. So even if there's not a specific restriction or prohibition, some of the equipment that's been added to the covered list. Next slide, please. So now I just want to talk about two recent additions that we've made to the covered list. The FCC updated the covered list back on December 22nd to include foreign drones or uncrewed aircraft systems, UAS. So about 2 months ago, we added all foreign-produced drones and critical components that are produced in foreign countries, so they can no longer receive equipment authorization. And then on January 7th of this year, we updated the list again to provide some specific individualized exemptions. The biggest and the most noteworthy is drones and critical components that are included on the Department of War's blue UAS cleared list are exempted from the covered list prohibition. And those are drones that the Department of War has determined do not pose any security risks and are safe to use both for consumers, for government, for industry, and for military partners as well. Next slide, please. So like I said before, with the telecommunications equipment, it's the same with the drones and the critical components. The prohibitions only apply to new models that were not authorized for use prior to December 22nd. So if you have a drone, whether it's a commercial drone, whether it's a toy drone, whether it's a drone that you use for photography or videography, if the model was approved and licensed by the FCC before December 22nd of last year, you can continue to use it. You can continue to buy and sell those models. The prohibition only applies to new models that were not previously authorized. And then the last point I want to make is that foreign drone manufacturers who are subject to the covered list prohibition now may request conditional approvals. So while this was a pretty broad blanket prohibition, there is a process that was established for the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of War to review requests and to grant approvals on an individualized basis. There's more information available on our website. We have a fact sheet and an FAQ document with a lot of frequently asked questions. I know this is a pretty technical overview, but there's a lot more information available on our website, and my contact information is listed on those documents as well. So if you have any specific questions about the covered list or any of the equipment or services, please feel free to reach out to me. That's the end of my presentation. I think I'm going to turn it over to Sherry now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Dawson, Deputy Chief of the Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division. I just wanted to thank everyone who has presented so far and to thank everyone who has come to visit us for NCPW Week. I've been monitoring the Q&A and chat options, and we have not received any specific questions other than asking if the slide presentation will be available to everyone, and it will be available. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. If you do have any questions, or if you think of any questions after the fact, you can also contact us at outreach@fcc.gov. And as I said before, the presentation itself will be available for our registered guests. Next slide, please. Kayla, I'm turning it over back to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sherry. So as we begin a wrap up of some of today's conversations and some of the activities that the Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division are doing, we're going to do a summary of that now. Next slide, please. We're going to be talking a lot about consumer and outreach partner resources. Next slide, please. This being National Consumer Protection Week, I'd like to let everyone know that the FCC this week has released a National Consumer Protection Week toolkit. I'll talk a little bit more about all the links to some of the information presented today, but this on the screen, you will see that there are samples of some of the things that are contained in our toolkit. We have consumer guides available, the flyer, which earlier there was a brief presentation on. We have the graphic available also. When you go to this toolkit, we also have links to our updated consumer tip cards. Next slide, please. And we have a lot going on this week, but there are other things that we would like to alert you for more information. Again, National Consumer Protection Week is always the first full week of March. This started on Sunday, it ends this Saturday, but there are some things that we'd like to present to you called our dates of interest. The FCC recently announced its intent to recharter the Communications Security Reliability and Interoperability Council, which is called CSRIC for short. If anybody is interested in submitting a nomination, please do so before the window closes on Wednesday, March 11th of this 2026. We have a link that contains more information about how to submit your nomination and other related information to CSRIC. The FCC's Open Commission meeting is going to take place on Thursday, March 26th beginning at 10:30 a.m. We have a link also that you can use for more information. The link contains some of the proposed topic agenda items that will be covered and information about how to join if you cannot join in person in the FCC's headquarters. It will be streamed live on fcc.gov/live. So please visit the link for more information. And going a little back, last month, February 24th, we held our Consumer Protection and Accessibility Advisory Committee, or CPAC, meeting. It is now available for viewing. The archive video is available at the link used on the screen. And for those that have asked, as Sherry has said, we will be sharing the slide deck so that you can find all this information. Next slide, please. Some of the resources that we have that we always like to talk about, not only for National Consumer Protection Week, but also throughout the year. One of them is our Consumer Help Center, which provides articles and information on a variety of consumer-focused information. When you visit our Consumer Help Center, there are also additional links that you can visit. I won't go through all of them now, but I will mention that not only can you find our social media page where it has all the information about where you can find us on different social media platforms. There is a link to our headlines if you're interested in specific public notices, consumer advisories, and news releases specific to the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. And it also contains a link to our Disability Rights Office, which provides expert advice and assistance to other commission bureaus and offices. And of course, our partners and other industries on issues that are relevant to people with disabilities. So if anyone has any questions about accessibility issues, please visit our Disability Rights Office. They also have a newsletter, Access Info, which of course, a little bit later on, will show you the link to where to find this information. Next slide, please. And I want to highlight something else that you can find a link to in our Consumer Help Center, which is the Consumer Inquiries and Complaints Center. Next slide. Now, while many consumers may submit complaints to our offices, please note that not all complaints that are issues are covered by the agency. When we receive those type of complaints, we do share it with the appropriate agency. But here, I wanted just to give an overview of how to file a complaint. When you go to our Consumer Inquiries and Complaints Center online, you can find icons of different types of topics where you can then proceed to click on to fill out a form. There's also articles that are included in the Complaint Center that you can read to see if your concern should be resolved via filling out a complaint form, or perhaps there are other tips and information that is provided to how to address your issue. Some of the topics that we cover via the complaint forms are complaints about radio, complaints about emergency. There are also separate pages within the online complaint center for covering accessibility issues, TV, internet, and phone. Please visit our Consumer Inquiries and Complaint Center for more information. Next slide, please. So what happens after a complaint is submitted? You'll be given a tracking number. You'll receive periodic updates via email, and you may be contacted by an FCC consumer representative if more information is necessary. Next slide, please. Here's the resources section. I will not go through every single resource in the interest of time. And again, when you receive the slide deck, you can look for more information. But I will be pointing out a couple of things. It was mentioned before, but if you have any questions about either this webinar, some of the information we have shared here today, you can contact outreach@fcc.gov. If you'd like to join our mailing list or you'd like to schedule any meetings to see how we can collaborate on providing information to your community, please send an email to outreach@fcc.gov. We also have links to, again, our Consumer Help Center and information about how to file comments. And though we didn't go into any comment periods today, that is really relevant information for when the FCC does send out information, public notices on comment periods. Next slide, please. We have more information here. I'd like to point out we have the link to how to access our Consumer Inquiries and Complaint Center. A lot of these information that you see on this slide here also includes separate articles and information about the N11, the abbreviated 3-digit dialing. Next slide, please. More information here. I wanted to point out that the 711 3-digit dialing consumer guide is available via the link that is provided on this page. Next slide, please. Here we have additional information. Wanted to point out if anyone is needing to contact the FCC via phone, you can call the number 888-225-5322. And for persons that are using video phones, that number is 844-432-2275. Next slide, please. And finally, on this slide, we have the link to the National Consumer Protection Week Toolkit. I encourage everyone to visit for a listing of all the materials we have available. Next slide, please. And this concludes our webinar. I'd like to thank all our presenters today, Ed, Christy, Chris, David, and Alma. I'd like to thank Sherry for monitoring all the Q&A portions and also the chat. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to having you join us at our next webinar.